Do we have Susanna here yet? Is she with us? Great.
Yes, I'm here.
Good, thank you. Hi. Thanks so much for being here. So Mayor Russell has directed us to continue to meet and focus on the items related in council goals. So today, Susanna Julber, sorry, did I say that correctly? Julber.
Yeah, Julber.
So she's going to give us a brief overview of the newly proposed code amendments for the shelters here in Bend. So as a quick reminder, Hans Jorgensen has been the NLA's liaison to the group who actually created the code, which is the sounding board to house our neighbors. And you're hearing this from the city. So we are hearing this so that we can take this information back to our boards and share it with our boards and our neighborhoods. The planning commission is going to have a work session in January of 2022 that's slated for January 10th, and then there will be a public hearing on January 24th. And following those meetings, the city council will be reviewing and making policy decisions on the proposed code amendments. So welcome, Susanna.
Great, thanks for that introduction.
Yeah, thank you.
Sears. Yeah, so thanks for having me and squeezing me in today. By now, you've probably heard some talk around town about the sounding board's work, which basically started in April of this year. And as Summer mentioned, Hans Jorgensen was the representative from the NLA on the sounding board. It was about a 9-person committee. So Councilor Perkins and Campbell are on it, as well as Planning Commissioner Scott Winters. And I'll show you the website and you can look and see who's all on it. But we worked pretty hard on developing a set of code amendments that would allow different shelter types citywide in most citywide zoning districts. And in August, end of August, the sounding board made a recommendation on a draft set of code amendments. And we wanted to try something different. We heard so much feedback about House Bill 2001 and not involving the public in these type of code amendments. And so we worked with our Office of Performance Management to do something called a story map. And I think you've all seen that before with your Land Use 101, but we're using it as a way to kind of survey the public and hope that they take the time to walk through it. It's a good way to try and explain complicated stuff like code amendments in this virtual world we're all in, and then they can provide input at the end. And instead of kind of just asking people a blanket statement, tell us what you think about houseless shelters or provisions for folks who are experiencing houselessness, we are asking pretty targeted questions about the specific code amendments, because that's what the sounding board was charged with, developing these code amendments. And we're trying to get that draft set of code amendments in shape to go to the public review for the Planning Commission on January 10th is the work session, and then January 24th would be the public hearing. And that's all tentative, that can change, but it looks pretty certain that it's going to go. So I don't know, maybe you all can raise your hands if you've had a chance to take a look at the story map already and you've seen the press release. Okay, so that gives me a good idea. So you've looked through it a little bit. And I mean, in some ways, we're kind of just curious too, if this is an effective way to kind of get people to understand a little more about what we're proposing, and an easy way to explain complicated stuff. Basically, we can put links in and things like that so people can take the time to read up on it instead of having to go to an open house, which I think, we're all in this world, which is probably changing as far as that goes. So I'm curious to hear what people think about just the tool in general. So let me go ahead and I'll just kind of walk through the code amendments. Can everybody see my screen? Maybe you can give me okay, great, thank you. So you'll see at the top, there's a landing page that talks generally about turn that off, about the issues we're having regarding houselessness in the city of Bend. We also there's a whole separate sounding board website just like this, but in Spanish. We had it translated to Spanish. So we're curious to see how many Spanish speakers we get taking the survey and how that response is. And there's just some background talking about the city's affordable housing crisis and kind of what we're doing, talking about the council goals. This is part of the city council goals to address increasing funding sources and expanding options for temporary and permanent housing. The city manager appointed the sounding board to house our neighbors, and we've been working to develop code amendments since then. Let's see. So basically all the shelters are proposed to be managed. So a managed type of situation, either on call or on-site managed. All of them provide on-site parking. Parking was a big kind of, Hans was here, I'd have him kind of talk about this a little bit more, but parking was a big discussion point for the sounding board members. And, you know, some of the city councilors are really, really think that it's a good idea to not require parking on site, but some of the service providers think it's super important too, just because they need a place to park their vehicles when they go and provide services to the folks in the shelters. And then for a lot of houseless people, their car is like their safe space. And so it's kind of not realistic to assume they're going to park 4 blocks away and leave all their belongings and go and stay in an overnight shelter. And it's a place, it's their home basically for many people. So also what we find that happens is if parking isn't required on site, it spills out into the neighborhood, and we don't want that to happen with these. So we'll see when it gets to city council, but the sounding board felt strongly that most of the sounding board members, I will say, that we provide some on-site parking. The shelters are a little bit less as in way of development requirements than like a brewery or a hotel would be required to meet. They're required to meet the minimum requirements of the ADA Act. So part of the site can be gravelled, so it's a little bit less requirements as far as that goes, just to keep down on the cost. And again, these are all recommendations. This is not set in stone. All shelters have to provide screening for any portable toilets and trash receptacles. They have to do good neighbor outreach and evidence of a neighborhood meeting, and they cannot be used for short-term rentals. And so most of the shelters, all of the shelters are permitted to some extent in all but the heavy industrial zoning district. And that's just because of the nature of that heavy industrial zone. Sometimes they use, flammable materials. It's not great to have a bunch of residents next to them. So that was a recommendation from the sounding board. And I'm sorry, this link is broken, and the tech person that set this page up was not here today. So tomorrow he's going to fix the link for me, but you can find the code amendments on the sounding board webpage. So I'll just go through really quick, and I'm not able to see if there's questions. So maybe Summer, you could let me know, or somebody could let me know if there's questions along the way. So the sounding board came up with these different shelter types. So the first is a group shelter. This is not in any order of importance or anything, but the group shelter is what you'd think of with the low barrier shelter on 2nd Street. So it's basically like one room set up with cots. And a lot of times it's much safer to provide this in order to get folks out of the right of way, where many times they're not safe sleeping there. And it's an important continuum in the transitional housing world. So the sounding board's recommendations for these type of shelters is that it just be regulated by the state building code. So, when you walk into any building, it says the maximum occupancy. I think back in the day when we would go into our council chambers, I think the max occupancy was 75. So it's pretty unlikely that with our land being so expensive, building materials, building construction being so expensive, we're going to ever see probably like a brand new building that's going to be a homeless shelter. I mean, it's just not really realistic. These are going to go into existing buildings. And so instead of coming up with a number based on zoning, the sounding board felt like leaving it to just the building occupancy size would pretty much take care of that. So, and those get lowered, with COVID, they were lowered quite a bit because to create the 6 feet of space and things like that. So just for perspective, the low barrier shelter on 2nd Street has a 70 bed capacity. Shepherd's House has a 30 bed capacity. And you can see examples of different pictures if you scroll through. And I think I'm going to go a little bit quicker here just because I know you have other stuff to get to. The next type of shelter is the multi-room shelter. So this is kind of like a hotel. If you think of a hotel or an apartment building where there's different rooms. And the Bethlehem Inn is a good example. Project Turnkey, which the city got funding from the state to purchase a hotel to convert to, I think, 28 rooms. So these are similar. So it's just different rooms. So the sounding board based their recommendations for the maximum number of bedrooms by zoning district. And it's very confusing, a little bit on what similar like apartments densities are based on. So based on their recommendations, a maximum of 258 rooms per acre would be allowed in the high density residential, commercial, light industrial, mixed use, and the public facilities zoning districts. So those are the higher density zoning districts. It would be 258 per acre, a maximum of 130 per acre in the medium density zoning district, and then 45 rooms per acre, which is pretty low density really, in the RM10 zoning district, and 43 and then 24 in the low density residential zoning district. And that's per acre. So, most of our lots are 7,500 square feet, 10,000 square feet. So, we tried to make it realistic and looking at those numbers with the standard city lots. Okay. And then this is the parking ratio. And as you click through, there's different examples of what these different places look like. The outdoor shelter is basically like, what you think of with a managed camp. This is from Southern Oregon, an emergency shelter situation they have down there. And then this is Veterans Village, which is opening soon in the north side of town. So these are, I think, 15 units and a common facility. And this was authorized under House Bill, not 2006, 3412, I think, I'm going to get it wrong. It's the prior version of 2006, but it's an emergency shelter bill that the legislature passed where these type of shelters can go in irrespective of zoning. So for outdoor shelter, this is probably the one we spent the most time on because, it's outside, it's not contained within a building. And so the sounding board felt like a good carrying capacity for a site, and based on sort of like this density, you can see it's not very dense, would be 1 unit or space, camp space, for each 1,000 square feet of lot. So using this formula, a 10,000 square foot lot could have 10 sites, an acre could have 43. So, and then parking is required at 0.5 up to 16 units. And then from then on, a little bit less parking is required. And you can see, so there's outdoor examples, Veterans Village, Rogue Retreat in Southern Oregon has quite a few of these kind of tiny home villages with like 8 little cabins on them. And then this is the managed campground in Southern Oregon, which happened after the fires down there. I think there's 120 sites there now. And then the final recommendation is the Hardship Shelter. And we've heard a lot from folks who have a single family residence, an existing residence own their own home, and they have an RV and they need a spot to put a family member or a friend in need for a few months while they get back on their feet. And city code prohibits that from happening unless they have a medical hardship, which is a process where they get a temporary use permit and provide verification from a doctor. It's pretty complicated, and it has to be not an RV, a manufactured home. So we don't have a lot of people that take advantage of that program because of the wildfire issues and, catastrophe last summer, we had through emergency order a provision where if a victim of a wildfire needed an RV to stay in, a person could get a permit through that, and that has since expired. We're not in that emergency situation any longer. We didn't get a lot of people taking advantage of it. You had to provide verification that you were receiving aid from like the Red Cross. So, it's another barrier to go through. But the sounding board wanted to recommend that a family member could do this. The permit is good for a year. The community building subcommittee listened to this and recommended that as well, a year, and you can renew it 2 additional times. And then if you go to this last tab, this is where you can tell us what you think. And it takes a little bit to load. And I think it's been really busy today. It's been very bogged down. So at the top here is a map, a link to the zoning map, so people can see where things are zoned. And then these questions are really targeted towards the specific recommendations, because that's what the sounding board is charged to do, develop recommendations and the technical code language. There's still spots to explain your answer. So I'd encourage everybody to take the time and maybe learn about the different shelters. You can link back to them to remind yourself of what is recommended, but we're asking about the numbers of units, about the parking ratios, all that kind of thing. So, and if you go to the bottom, I've had a lot of feedback from the public emailing me about how we're going to be able to tell which part of town people are from. If people want to, they can fill out the demographic information and give us a idea of where people are from and how many years we've lived in Bend, if they're currently houseless, and where they reside, age, things like that. So it's all voluntary though. And so all of this information, these questions will come back to me in an Excel spreadsheet. And I think just depending on the format I get, I'm going to stop sharing so I can talk. Hi. So it'll come in an Excel spreadsheet, and I'll probably, PDF that and put it online so people can see responses and things. And then the sounding board's going to review that and make their final recommendations on the code November 10th, and that's open to the public. So, yeah. I see some hands up, so.
I think we have Cassie first.
Hi, Cassie.
Can you hear me?
Now we can, yeah.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello?
We can hear you, Cassie. We can hear you. It looks like your connection might be stalling out.
Yeah, Cassie, we can't hear you now. Let's try Lisa and then we'll come back to you.
Thanks, Michaela. I've got a couple of questions. So related to the parking, has there been any discussion about how we'll manage parking around those areas? Like, are we going to have parking patrols, or is there going to be timed parking? What I'm curious about is, how do we avoid a situation where somebody parks an RV and maybe that RV is non-working and they can't move it, and all of a sudden it becomes permanent there at the site? Do we have any ideas there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think it would fall under the same parking rules that everybody falls under. So is Ian on? Maybe he can weigh in, but hi. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, Susanna, we have parking regulations. We enforce them as we can. They're often complaint driven and not as enforced as and reacted to quickly as some people would sometimes like, but I see no reason why the standard parking regulations that we apply to everyone couldn't apply in that situation.
So thank you. So I think that people are probably reading the stories about what's happening in Seattle, where they have broken down cars, broken down RVs, and it is to the magnitude that the city cannot respond. And it's overwhelming to the city also because of cost. They just don't have the funds to manage all of that. So I'm really concerned about parking, really concerned that, any idea how many service people would be visiting these sites on a daily basis?
Yeah, probably like I mean, it depends on the shelter size. Bethlehem Inn has 178 rooms. I don't know that service providers necessarily go there that much because they're managed by the Bethlehem Inn. So, but probably, I would think 3 to 4 max. Sometimes Mosaic Medical will go and do, some servicing. Sometimes a shower truck will go. So, yeah.
That's exactly what I thought. And in some cases, it looks like our planned developments have enough parking for maybe just the service providers and not anybody else. So again, I'm really concerned about parking because if there isn't any parking, it will overflow into the neighborhoods and impact our neighbors. Thank you very
So
much.
Susanna,
Yeah.
what's the best way to express those concerns? Is there something we would need to do or could do before the planning commission? Or is that our best opportunity?
No, well, you could take the survey and, it asks about, do you agree with the ratio of X to Y? And if not, do you want more parking, less parking? So go ahead and
Right.
take that. The sounding board will be looking at that. And, it's really great if people weigh in, if we have a lot of responses. So because parking was a big issue, do we require it? Do we not? How much do we require? So it would be great to get folks' input on that specific issue. And then
we'll definitely discuss that at our various neighborhoods with the boards and neighbors and then get involved. Thank you.
Absolutely. One other question. I haven't seen any provisions for animals around these managed camps, and I am a huge animal lover, as Summer knows, and Summer and I both are, she's very involved currently in rescue, but we're both at Hurricane Katrina. And so we know the emotional ties that people have to their animals. What is the response here for people with dogs or cats or any other animal for their emotional support and well-being for the animals?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the probability is the city's not going to be managing any providing the regulatory framework for houseless shelters to go in. But the service providers, who are managing the shelter and providing the management can make a decision about that on their own. If you go to the proposed code, I think we have kennels in there. I can't remember if that's stated or not, but I'm pretty sure we put things that shelters may provide the following, and it's not an exhaustive list, but I think we put kennels in there. I can double check. Oh, you're muted. There you go.
I think that's terrific. If we're going to do that, if we're going to provide any services, I think we have to keep that in mind. And then my last question, comments on the survey. A lot of conversation going on. Thank you. On the survey, I noticed that we're tying it back to geographic areas, maybe quadrants. But why not tie it back to the neighborhood association so that we can gauge some of our participation and gauge even how effective the neighborhoods are being with getting this word out about the survey?
Yeah, that's a good idea. I think we talked about that, and a lot of people don't know what neighborhood association they're in. So we went with the quadrants instead. But we can think about whether we want to change it or not. I mean, at least with the quadrants, we'll be able to tell Southeast, Old Farm that way, but good input. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be really important as we continue to do these surveys and we're trying to gauge the effectiveness of neighborhood associations. It would be nice to have those kinds of, that kind of data reported back to us. It really should be a two-way communication so neighborhoods know what they're doing right and what we're not being very effective. And I think those are all of my questions. Thank you.
So I am really not excited to do this, but we have a lot of information and work to do on this agenda. So we can do, let's do 5 more minutes and get through as many questions as we can. And then Susanna, if we can get your contact information so we can follow up with you after the meeting, that would be great. I want to make sure we have time for rep reports at the end of the meeting as well. Elizabeth, I think you're next.
Thanks. I looked at the survey and I appreciate the opportunity to give feedback. As I was reading the questions though, it is so technical and precise, which I get that you're asking for precise circumstances, but just, feedback from my take on this is that I don't know how to answer those questions. I've read through the descriptions. I can try to visualize it, trying to visualize 10,000 square feet of a lot and 43 bedrooms and stuff. It's just, so that is difficult. I mean, I don't know where to go. I guess I could look at the code, but it's still really hard to just visualize what that would look like if it's planted in a given neighborhood. So that's just my take on the survey questions.
Yeah, that's good. Just for reference, especially with the outdoor shelter, because that's not, inside something. So, it's going to be more impactful. But the Veterans Village is, I think, 2.7 acres, and that has 15 units. Don't quote me on that. I'm going to double check. But yeah, just to give you an idea. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Chris?
I got the unmute. Can you hear me? Maybe not. First, I hope the survey has a send button, because it seems like I fill out a lot of things and then I don't know how to get them to you. So if that's prominent. And just that the women's shelter east on Bear Creek has dog kennels that I think are used. And I don't know if that's relevant to this discussion, but they've been put in. And I think it's an arm of Bethlehem Inn for women out there on Bear Creek. That's all I'd say.
Yeah, thank you.
Tim?
Hi, can you hear me? Oh, good, because I had some audio problems earlier in the meeting. Just a question on the putting an RV in the driveway and how that would stand up to a lot of neighborhoods that have restrictive covenants that either allow RV parking for like 1 or 2 days, or they're all one family units. So has the group dealt with that, and what's going on with that? Thanks.
Yeah, CC&Rs, Ian, called you my brother's name. Sorry.
I know that's a compliment, Susanna.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is the distinction between what city allows through its code or development code, and then what these private CC&Rs allow or don't allow is an interesting one. When a city, I'll speak generically, when a city is looking at whether something is approvable or allowed, it looks only at its code. So it's municipal code, it's development code, whatever the issue is. You may have situations where a city says, yep, this is allowed, our code authorizes this, but you also have private CCNRs, which are private agreements between private parties that say this can't happen. So a city generally doesn't consider what CCNRs may be in place when it's making a decision as to whether approve or allow something. That does not mean that changes to a city's development code that allow a certain use or activity override a CCNR. It just means the city is taking the perspective that it's legal from the city's point of view. If neighbors or an HOA have a CCNR that they can point to that says, hey, you property owner, you can't do this on your property because when you bought the property, there was a covenant that restricts your ability to do it. That is generally still enforceable by a neighbor, an HOA, or some other private party. So you can have these things that sort of exist side by side and say different things in terms of what is allowed and what isn't allowed. City generally only looks at its own code. If there's a conflict with an applicable CCNR, it's up to somebody like an HOA or a neighbor to pursue enforcement of that vis-a-vis the property owner that they think is violating it. So that's the levels of regulation or the methods of regulation. The city's code and the CCNR don't really intersect and cross, and they can be enforced and considered separately. So that can sometimes be confusing. I hope I sort of answered the question.
Yeah, you have. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Karen, if you have a real quick question. And if not, we can send it to her after the meeting.
No, I have a quick question. Is there any kind of notification process to let neighborhood associations know if any of these shelters are going in place in their neighborhoods so that we can in turn educate the neighborhood?
We haven't talked so much in the sounding board. Well, we have, but talked a little bit about whether these should be, certain ones should be type 1 versus type 2. So that's type 2 is when there's more notice to neighbors. And that's when I think you get probably noticed as the neighborhood chair or something, like neighborhood association chair, about land use stuff in your neighborhood. We could definitely look at something like that. I think, you know, people would probably appreciate that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be great if you could build that in. And then one quick question is, there's a lot of different populations of people that don't have homes or houses. I'm guessing that the service providers that will be offering these types of shelters will be deciding what population of the houseless will be going into these shelters. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would be correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, folks, I am so sorry, but we are going to have to move on with our agenda. Susanna, can you throw us your contact information, please?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'll email it to Michaela and she can get it out to you. So
beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Great.
Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you.
So we're going to move on to NLA history, role, and council assessment. Michaela is going to lead us through this. So as an introduction, we've been talking a lot about turnover at the NAs and the NLA. And that includes with Mayor Russell and Councilor Perkins last month. So Mayor Russell has agreed that we can discuss NA board member and regular member, like neighbor member recruitment and engagement over the next few months. Because many of the NLA reps are new, Michaela is going to share some of the historical context and frame the role and expectation of the NAs and the NLA in the upcoming assessment that council is going to be doing and for our brainstorming later today. Michaela, you're on.
Thanks, Summer. And I'm going to turn off my camera because I'm having some internet issues. I guess that's in the air today. So if you can't see me, I'm also not going to see you. Now I'm going to turn it over to Kayla and Summer to watch for hands while I bring up slides and go through this process. So really what we're hoping to do today is give some context. Because we've had all of that turnover, like Summer said, on NA boards and with the NLA, there's a lot of the history of the neighborhood associations that have been lost in the shuffle, if you will. And so I think in order for us to move forward effectively, it's really good if we revisit where we came from. So with that, I'm going to pull up some slides here. So I'll stop every now and then to ask you guys if you have questions. But first, let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. So the timeline that I have for today is just to go over a quick timeline of when the neighborhood associations began to where we're at today. They've been around for about 20 years. So we'll walk through the different steps that we've gone through in our relationship with the city. We'll talk about how the Neighborhood Leadership Alliance became to be an advisory committee. Sorry for those of you that this is a review, but I will ask you to chime in if I have gotten anything wrong, since you were there and I was not. But hopefully we can bring everyone else up to speed with what the process was that went through to become the Neighborhood Leadership Alliance. We're going to talk about the purpose of advisory committees, which we touched on a little bit last month with Mayor Russell and Councilor Perkins. We're also going to talk about the role of the NLA relationship to the neighborhood associations, the upcoming council goals assessment. We'll have an opportunity for brainstorming later on in the meeting, and then next steps. So really what we're trying to do is set the stage for that brainstorming a little bit later today. So I find it helpful to share goals for the day. So my goals for the day are kind of in two categories. The first is that I would really like to provide you guys with the context, as I was just describing, bring us back to our purpose as an advisory committee, and then help you understand how we're all going to play a role in this council assessment, neighborhood association assessment that's in council goals. So the second half is the neighborhood association recruitment and engagement conversation. With the brainstorming exercise, I really want to gain a better understanding of what barriers are that you face as neighborhood associations, and leave with a nice list of ideas to break down into action items that the NLA, the city, the neighborhood associations can all collaborate on. So let's start out with this timeline. And I had actually quite fun going back in time and finding some of the original code language with when the neighborhood association system was established. So the first neighborhood association was established in 2001. That was Southwest Bend Neighborhood Association. I included the list of the other neighborhood associations along with their establishment dates so that you can see that. Neighborhood associations during that time from 2001 to 2010, they were centralized within the city, meaning they were an extension of a department. So we had an office of neighborhood associations, which actually had 4 city staff members who regulated the neighborhood associations, helped with maintenance and organizational things, implemented projects, and really were a support to the neighborhood associations. Then in 2008, the Great Recession hit. With the Great Recession, our budgets at the city of Bend were cut and continued to be cut year after year, which eventually resulted in layoffs of the entire Office of Neighborhood Association staff. So in 2011, the city realized like, we need help. We have one person doing the work for this department that essentially no longer exists. And so how are we going to restructure to make this successful? So in 2011, the neighborhood associations spoke with city leadership, and they decided to really decentralize the neighborhood association system. And there was a few reasons for that. The first being that everything within the city and operating as a governing body would be subject to public meetings law, public records law, meaning all of the neighborhood associations had to track their records, make sure they were having open meetings with recorded minutes. You guys are a part of the NLA, you know how this works. And all of the neighborhood associations were really following that structure. The other half of it was that there was a loud outcry from neighborhood associations that they wanted to be able to advocate for candidates. They wanted to be able to be a part of political advocacy, and then they wanted to be a part of elections and make sure that their voices were known. And so when the proposed code change to decentralize the neighborhood associations was given to council, there were really not a lot of objections to that. The neighborhoods thought it would be better for both the city and the neighborhoods to be separate. So what we did was we decentralized and we went into this communications grant funding cycle. From there, and even since 2001, there was a lot of ebbs and flows of the neighborhood associations. After they were decentralized from the city, there was a lot of inactive neighborhood associations that were still existing but not meeting. And so it's taken time to build up to this point. And I always find it interesting when my supervisor, Ann Orend, who many of you know, tells me what it was like when she got to the city and how there was only 6 neighborhood associations that were active at that time. And so looking at us today, like we have come through a very long process to get to 13 active neighborhood associations, which should be considered a win in all of our books. So in 2017 is when the conversations of the NLA started to happen. When the neighborhoods were decentralized, they came up with a group called the Neighborhood Association Roundtable, which many of you I'm sure are familiar with. And that group we'll talk about in just a second. In 2019, the NLA went to advocate for more communications grant funding so that you could do more outreach and engagement for your members through mailings and such. And they received that. So last biennium was the first time that neighborhoods got about $100,000 a year to do communications between the 13. And then in September of 2019, they hired a new staff liaison to help the neighborhood associations and guide the Neighborhood Leadership Alliance, which is me. Lisa.
Just a point of clarification. So with regard to the Neighborhood Association Roundtable, that group had been meeting on a regular basis before the NLA was established. And it was very informal conversations, and it was out of that group that we were talking about becoming codified and some of the advantages to becoming codified. In particular, we wanted to have a voice and we wanted a seat at the table in order to have conversations with the council, because neighborhood associations were not being taken seriously in their presentations previously. So that's just a little bit of a clarification. As everybody I think knows, NART continues to meet, and the idea, we talked about disbanding NART, and we decided we didn't want to do that because NART, the primary goal around NART is to create operational efficiencies and to further share information. I think we all know here at the NLA level, we have very limited time, and the focus is on bigger topics, and we don't get a chance to talk about some of the more mundane things like what mailing list, or how do you manage your mailing list, and how are you sending out messages and various other things? How can you do a better meeting? So those topics are happening at NART. So just clarification.
Thanks, Lisa. And yeah, so everything that Lisa just told you is on the screen in front of you. In August of 2017, the city started meeting with NART, and NART helped guide what became the mission statement, draft policies and procedures, and eventual code amendments that established the NLA. And so this is where I wanted to bring us back to the purpose of the NLA. This is actually the code section that I took from our Bend code. It describes the purpose of the NLA being a conduit, both for the neighborhood associations and their members to share issues, barriers, activities, ideas with council, but also for council and the other city staff that are working on initiatives for council goals to share those things with the neighborhood associations. So there's 4 points that the NLA really needs to focus on, and what we try to focus on in our strategic plan and everything that we do. One being recommendations that we give to council based on a review of plans and policies and programs, just like we heard about Susanna's shelter code. That's going to be our job to participate and advise council on what we think about those code changes. We did have Hans who participated in those code changes as an NLA rep through August. And now we're at the point where we're making that transition. So our next opportunity would be at Planning Commission in January for an NLA rep to sit in as Planning Commission is learning about these changes, as well as the individual opportunity to go take that survey and provide your input early on, which I highly suggest. The other piece is input to council on the recommendations and needs of neighborhoods. So that is what I was speaking to you about. We've seen several examples of that, one of them being land use code changes, and we'll get into detail about that in a minute. The third is advisory input to both council and staff. So this is a purpose that we saw come to fruition in the neighborhood street safety program as we guided staff as they created the program that eventually brought neighborhood safety projects to your neighborhoods. And then the last one here, which I think is really the crux of the NLA, and I don't know if crux is the right word, but we are focused on civic engagement and education of neighborhood association constituents. So the hope is that as an NLA rep, you're hearing about these topics like shelter code from the NLA, and you're bringing that information back to your neighborhood association boards to decide what you want to do with it. Is it something you want to distribute in your newsletter? Is it something that you want to bring up at a general membership meeting? Do you want to do a survey? Those are all ways that you can let your membership know what's going on, but also get their feedback and pulse so that when the Neighborhood Leadership Alliance goes to Planning Commission and has an input, they're able to speak on behalf of their membership. Does anybody have questions at this point? Okay. So you have seen this flowchart before, and I think I just like it because it shows the conduit pretty clearly. We have the neighborhood associations who are giving input to the Neighborhood Leadership Alliance. I wanted to put this into action for you so you could see how it works. So the example that I want to use is the last year's goal to do a land use education program and complete that goal. So in what the city council had heard from neighborhood associations and the NLA was that neighbors were frustrated when developments happened in their neighborhood and they had no idea about anything that had to do with those projects. They didn't know about the public meetings, they didn't know about the application process, and it was frustrating. And so the Neighborhood Leadership Alliance participated in council input session like we did this year to say, this is something that we want to focus on. And council put that into their goals for the 1921 biennium. So that became our project. And as we went into that project, what we saw was that there was actually some code changes that could help with the land use education system. So at one of the quarterly check-ins that the NLA participates in with council and other committees, they said, we really think there's code changes that could make this process simpler for the community. And council said, okay, you can continue on and try to make those changes. And we did. We made improvements to the public notification and public comment system, which otherwise would not have been changed. And those were code amendments. So they went through this entire flowchart. So how does that work with this biennium? What are we looking at here? I've heard from some of you over the last few weeks that there's a concern that the neighborhood associations are on the metaphorical chopping block, so to speak, that you're worried that this assessment means that council doesn't want to invest in neighborhoods or that we aren't meeting the mark. And I just want to share with you that how this came about, how this assessment goal came about and what it really means for us. Because council does care about the neighborhood associations and their opinions. And they also care about how the city's reaching out for public participation. So at the center of all of council's 70+ goals for this biennium is equity, which means almost every goal that is in this plan is going to be looked at through a lens of equitable representation. That means that the neighborhood associations are being assessed to see how well you are a conduit of information and how accessible you are to underrepresented groups who maybe aren't at the table right now, but so are we. So as city communications staff, one of our other assessments that we're working on is an assessment for the city outreach strategy and structure. So we're going to be looking at our own process and see where the gaps are and how we can improve as well. The hope is that we can do that with the neighborhood association assessment, that we can look at what we're currently doing, define where some of the barriers are to accessibility, and maybe make some changes that would support the neighborhoods in being this conduit for member feedback and for community participation. So all of those big words to say, put your taxpayer hat on. And I think I had a conversation with Summer that I really loved. We give the neighborhood associations about $100,000 a year to spend on communications and outreach to members. And so naturally, we want to ask, is that doing us a due diligence? Are we being representative? And assess the situation. So, I mean, we don't give any other community partner that type of money. So how are we using the neighborhoods? Is it effective? What can we do to change it and make it better? Anybody have questions at this point? Okay.
This has been really helpful so far. I mean,
That's good.
This is really helping clarify some things for me. Thank you.
Yeah. So the assessment itself, what is that going to look like? I wanted to lay this out for you. So the communications department is in charge of this goal or this goal strategy, for example. So it's going to be a project that I am leading as your liaison. And our goal is to assess the neighborhood association system as a conduit of information and representation and create opportunities to engage underserved communities. So how are we going to do that? The first way that we can, that we start this type of process is to do information gathering. And so there's several inputs that my team and I have identified that we think will go into this assessment. So in front of you are those outputs. The first is that city assessment about our own communication strategy. In October, later in October, we have a new community relations manager that's going to be joining the city. His name is Zavi Bora. You might have seen him around town. He is on the Bend Parks and Recs board. So he just went through a big campaign not too long ago. So if that sounds familiar, that's probably why. And Zavi is going to be doing our equity and partnerships or focusing on equity and partnerships as a community relations manager. And him and I are going to work very closely together on these assessments because we really believe that they're going to feed into each other. And so with this, I've laid out where I think the NLA is going to fit. Now, Zavi hasn't started yet, and this is his assessment. And so I'm waiting for him to come on where then we can identify where the NLA will come into that assessment. But looking forward to seeing how those two work together. This next assessment input is the community survey. So Hans and Lisa advocated for some funding to do a survey that was focused on neighborhood associations and neighborhood issues. And we were able to get $10,000 in the budget to do this survey with a third-party company who creates surveys. So it won't be statistically valid. Those run in the 40,000 plus range for surveys, but it will have professional survey creators who will be able to work with us on the questions that we put out there to the community. And what this survey is meant to do is survey the people who aren't connected with neighborhood associations, who know nothing about you, who maybe just moved to Bend, who are involved in other community groups. This is the input that we need for everybody that we're not reaching, right? So that we understand where they're coming from and maybe what the best way to reach them is. The next input would be the neighborhood associations. You're literally the meat, the bread and butter of the assessment. What we're hoping to do is come in and talk to you guys about issues, barriers, what you're seeing, and we'll be finding a way to arrange that with each of you in a way that is comfortable for your boards, whether that's me coming in and leading a discussion or a facilitator or so on. We don't exactly know yet, but it is coming. So you'll help us come up with those questions. And then the city staff are also another input. So talking to them, every single one of our staff almost talks to the neighborhood association constituents. And so they have some good ideas about what we do and maybe ways that we can support you better. So we want to ask them questions. And then the SWOT assessment, which is that last input and a big part of the NLA's work. After we've collected all of this data, putting it together, and then having a moderator or facilitator take us back to our roots, which is going through that SWOT assessment. And for those of you that aren't familiar with what a SWOT assessment is, SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. This was something that we did as the NLA was forming, and Dave brought it up last month suggesting that the NLA go back and do this. And what we're going to do is participate in the same activity, but do it with the lens of the assessment. So after all of those inputs are brought together, the next step is to take all of the inputs and information, analyze the results, turn it into a plan for council. And so that's going to be really a lot of work on the person that we hire to help us with that assessment. It's going to have as we come up with barriers and the strategies to overcome those barriers, we're going to have the Human Rights and Equity Commission look at it with their eyes. We're going to have council look at it with their eyes. Like we really want to make sure that we're hitting the mark for representation and what they're hoping.
And Michaela, I just wanted to check in. We're almost at 5 o'clock, just for time reference.
Perfect, thanks. So how does this assessment fit into what we're doing in the next 3 months of talking about board member recruitment and engagement? We're going to be asking these questions, the same questions. What are the barriers to recruitment and engagement? What are the strategies and ideas to overcome those barriers? And what are the low-hanging fruit that we could do quickly? So the data that we collect is all going to go into the assessment. Some strategies and ideas we can do right now, and hopefully do some quick fixing for the near future to get your boards back up to par. And then some will take more resources than we currently have, which the assessment could potentially advocate for. But I think before we go into brainstorming, it's useful when we talk about, sorry, are you able to see my what the NLA has already done slide? No, you're stuck. Okay. I'm going to unshare. When did it stop?
It stopped on the assessment plan slide with the 4 columns.
Oh, okay. Oh gosh.
Want me to share mine?
Yeah, maybe. I can't even see anybody on Zoom anymore.
Are you able to see the slide, Michaela? Oh, we lost Michaela.
And
Don't worry, I'm back.
Oh, there she is.
All right, and it stopped. Let's see if I can stop share. Oh, Anne, you're on it. Okay. Thank you.
I think that's where we were.
Yeah, that's fine. So the one right before it, actually, if you don't mind. So I think it's important to go back and see what the NLA has already tried when it comes to recruitment and engagement strategies to see if any of it is worth revisiting. This specific goal was in the 1921 strategic plan for the NLA. So what we did was all of these action items that are on the board, we talked about communication needs. We did a communication survey. And so Anne, you can forward. So these accomplishments, this is something that we went over in, I think, May, talking about everything the NLA had done. We developed a new NLA webpage. We defined a new layout for the neighborhood association toolkit, like the board toolkit, added a web page just for budget tracking to make that easier for neighborhoods. We did a survey to understand how neighborhoods are communicating with their members and then what tools are being utilized to do that. And then we used the results of that to determine where else we needed to focus. We did 2 citywide mailing lists that reached renters rather than just property owners. And then you can advance. And then we purchased a survey tool that the NLA used for micro units and that neighborhood associations also partnered and collaborated with. So they got a better price and were able to use that tool as well. We also purchased, it was a communications manager that didn't quite get off the ground. We'll talk about that. We began collecting information on compliance reports that we had never done before, like, do you have a Facebook page? Do you have followers? Those simple questions. And then developed a neighborhood leader orientation for the boards, which even at that point before the pandemic hit, we were seeing board turnover. Next slide. So what did we try and didn't quite succeed? And these are things that I've heard several times over from neighborhoods. Weren't we coming up with a web page template that everyone could use? We did look at that. That was something that the NLA communications group asked the neighborhood associations about. My understanding, because it was before that I got here, was that everyone decided, or that the majority decided, that most neighborhoods use their own web host platform and that it wouldn't make sense to do a shared template. The shared social media manager, we did purchase Hootsuite. We came up with a process. We identified topics, and Hootsuite, for those of you who don't know, is like an auto poster, I like to call it, for Facebook. We were going to have one account for all of the NAs that were interested and auto post onto their pages about typical citywide stuff like what's a neighborhood association, how's it different from a HOA, that kind of thing. We came up with all those topics, but it never launched. We still need to write the messaging, come up with graphics and web page links, and figure out how to get it all loaded into Hootsuite. And then we also offered a neighborhood leader orientation. That was right before the pandemic. And there was about 2 people that signed up for that. And so even though I had heard from many that they were interested in an orientation and wanted to learn about how neighborhoods worked and what they can utilize, like tools they had as board members, we didn't have anybody show up. So more recently, I went to Boyd Acres just last month and gave an orientation to their board. And that's something that we could definitely do again if that's helpful. So those are just the 3 ideas that we didn't quite get to, but if we want to revisit, that's definitely worth it. And then I'm going to jump us into Miro, but before I do that, do you have questions at this point? A lot of information. Okay, so Miro is a whiteboard. It is something that I learned in a program that I participated in last year with Bloomberg. And it's just interactive. So what I'm going to do is do all the controlling and the scribing for this. There are prompts to get your brain juices flowing. And what I want to do is just capture all of our thoughts in one place, and then we can end it on that note with hopefully just some excitement about what we could do in the next few months.
And so this is all brainstorming specifically on recruitment and engagement for the NAs?
Yes. So really focusing on recruitment and engagement. This is what I had asked homework wise for everybody to just be thinking about, not that you had to bring anything specific. Can you see my whiteboard?
It's very small.
It is very small. I'll zoom in, don't worry.
Okay. Cool.
So the goal here, and Summer outlined it well, recruit and engage new members, board members, new members and board members for neighborhood associations. So what we're going to do is we're going to move through the barriers, the successes, and the opportunities. And I have prompts for each of these. So first, let's get into the barriers. And Morgan, I know you have to leave soon. And so would you like to start us off? I know you sent in a nice list.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave you with that list. I imagine they're very similar to things that other folks are gonna share from their boards. But I'm in my vehicle right now listening in, so I don't want to pull that up.
Oh, sure. Don't worry about it.
And share that. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm with you though.
That sounds good. So with that, I would say let's start here. So we're going to do board members first, and then we'll go into NA members. So the example that I put for board members is something that we talked about last month. Volunteer boards experience a lot of turnover. That's a barrier to being able to recruit and engage new members. Something that Morgan shared in her response, or with the barriers that Larkspur had come up with, was just that. It's hard to get excited when you're always in this startup mode.
How do you want us to talk? Is it free fall? Okay.
Yes.
Well, I've got a couple of things to add real quick. One is just people with agendas. I think it's really important that we, the neighbor associations, educate the people that come into the board and know who's coming in, but that can be a barrier. you want to get people all perspectives, but we have to work on how to do that. And my thought is make sure you have an application or some sort of a group consensus.
Okay. So we're just focusing on barriers right now, but that's good because when we get to there, you can bring that up again for me. All right. Others.
I can talk. This is Karen. To me, a barrier is that, to me, recruitment of board members takes almost like a personal relationship. It's talking to people and knowing groups and that would be interested. And I don't have those connections as the chair of the neighborhood association. So for me to create a list, and I've done it, I've created a list like of 20 different organizations that I could talk to about potentially being on the board, but I'm a stranger to them. They're a stranger to me. They have no motive to basically work with me. So a huge barrier is I just don't have the knowledge of who I should be asking to diversify my board, if that makes sense.
That sounds like, oops, am I muted? Remember? No, I'm good.
We've had that problem too at Orchard, Karen, where we go through a recruitment process and I think we're trying to reach out to underserved populations within our neighborhood. And we're just having a really hard time finding the people we need to talk to or just accessing those cultures. I don't know how to say it, but hopefully you can interpret that.
Thanks, Summer. Let's go to Chris.
I mean, the real barrier for us is COVID and the difficulty of having any kind of bigger meeting face to face. And I know nobody has a good solution for that, but I think our board meetings would be well attended, well advertised. If somebody was willing to have 10 strangers in their home, and most aren't. I look for our Old Bend neighborhood to have a neighborhood yard sale. And I think we can all get to know our neighbors better if we do something together. That one has been done before in the past in Old Bend. So that's more of a solution type. But anyway, at least for me, I've struggled to even find a place where I think we could recruit people to come, but I can't find a place to meet.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris.
Mhm.
Elizabeth.
I think that of my experience with people in my neighborhood is, and just friends, I've met a lot of people in my neighborhood because my daughter went to the elementary school that we back up to. And so I've met just a lot of parents and families. They're too busy. They are working and have children, and they can't get involved at that level. It's not that they're not interested. Sometimes it comes across that way, but it's like any volunteer organization. There's like a handful of people that actually show up and do stuff, and it's always the same people. And it's just people are too busy to get involved on serving on a board.
Thank you. Lisa.
So I have two things. So first, I've got some neighbors that they've submitted public comments, they have written letters, they've sent emails, and they feel like the city is not listening to them. They've expressed their opinions and they don't get any feedback, and they see the city taking alternate approaches to solving problems. So yeah, neighbors feel unheard and they don't feel like their time is valued. So why should they participate? Second, in terms of diversity, I approached a person of color to try to diversify, and he politely indicated that I was only about the 20th entity that month that had approached him to join his board. So how are we going to win when we are maybe vying against or battling against all of these other entities, like, you know, and some of them are wonderful, United Way, etc. So how do we get their interest?
Thank you. And Kathy.
Yeah, I would just say I see that there's a lack of clarity around what neighborhood associations do still, even though you're able to express it relatively well, Michaela. I think there's a lack of passion around that at the current time. I think that when there was less change in Bend, including COVID change, that people felt more like, oh yeah, I have a neighborhood. I belong in my neighborhood. I want to see those people. I want to do things with those people. I want to find out what's going on. I want to be active. And now it's just like that folks feel so dumped on. And there's such a level of change that they've kind of turtled up. I expect that will change some, which is, I think, different than the COVID and being able to meet face to face. I don't see that as a big problem, but I see COVID has changed people's ideas about their values and about life and about where they want to live and who they want to be and what they want to do with their time.
Here, here.
How about Jim?
Okay, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, mine's very similar to Lisa's. The neighbors felt unheard. It's also board directors felt unheard. And I know we at SEBNA have felt that very acutely. I know over the last couple of weeks, tried to put together kind of a marketing piece, like what are the benefits we can sell? And I could not come up with any because everything we've tried to do with the neighborhood didn't work. And unfortunately, the city's lack of response, us ignoring us, has had a really detrimental effect. And so not only the neighbors feel a lot of apathy, but I think board members do too. And I hear that at almost every board meeting we go to, and I know the mayor's heard it too. So, for example, and I'll give you just a quick example, the Murphy Road closure. We got notified it's going to be a year-long closure. We tried to work with the city to see if we could mitigate that for the benefit of the residents, and we got no response from the city. They just wouldn't talk to us at all. So that's an example of what I mean by we're unheard, you know, and it's just like the city doesn't want to talk to us. So that's what we at SEBNA are feeling. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. And Dave.
I have been sitting here for the last hour thinking about what this process is doing. Once again, all of the work that we have been hearing from Michaela has been done without, as far as I know, minimal or no input from the NLA. And this that we're doing right now is also without any input that I know of from the NLA in putting this together. I can sum it up by saying, if you put a dot on the map and you start giving advice or asking questions or putting positions that lead to that point in the map, that is exactly what we're doing right now. The NLA is not deciding what to do to help the city. The city is deciding what to tell the NLA. And right now, I'm really confused. I came to this session with some brainstorming. This is not brainstorming. This is pointing directions. And if we follow these directions, we're going to end up exactly where the city wants us to be. I want the NLA to have more input with what the dot on the map is and what's really good or what we think is really good, and ask the city for support, not have the city decide what's good for us and ask us for input how to get that job done. I came with some slides that have some information on them, and this is not leading to the kinds of input that I expected to be able to give tonight, because this isn't brainstorming. This is just advising us which way to go.
Dave,
I'm sorry to be that way, but that's
Dave,
what I'm getting.
This is Summer. I hear you. I hear where you're coming from. So a couple things. So I have been involved in several conversations about not decision-making meetings, but conversations where we're talking about, okay, here is council's goal. This is how we're thinking NLA can participate and have input. And this was our idea collectively on how to get feedback and ideas from the NLA. So what we're doing.
Who was the collective?
We've had several meetings with different folks, but the core has been myself and Michaela.
You were involved.
A QED.
What does that mean?
It means quid erat demonstratum. What you just said is you and Michaela have met, and now Michaela has gone off and come up with a set of leading questions. And the biggest thing that stands in our way is that we are one of over 70 volunteer organizations in Bend that are looking for people exactly like we want.
Okay.
And nobody
Dave,
has brought that up.
I'm a little confused because we met for coffee last week, and
but we didn't talk about this.
Yes,
we talked about going through a brainstorming activity. This is how the professional organization that I worked with, Bloomberg, they're well-known, Bloomberg Philanthropies, this is a strategy for brainstorming that they had set me up with during my trainings. And so that was something that I wanted to bring to this group because I really appreciated it. And really what it does is it allows us to look at the barriers and eventually get to solutions. And I know you had come up with a timeline for us and you'd wanted to meet. And in the email before this meeting, I had asked if you would share those ideas in the request for a timeline during the opportunities section of this. So we're almost there to the ideas.
Well, did you write down that the major single barrier that we have is that there are 70 other organizations that want exactly the same people we do.
That's exactly what we're doing, Dave.
A huge barrier.
So this is the process that we're going through to get input from the NLA. So the city is not participating in this. Michaela is facilitating a conversation where we as NLA members are bringing barriers. This is what we're facing. And then as a group, we're going to brainstorm ideas for conquering those barriers. She's simply facilitating a process. So I guess I disagree in that I don't see the city leading us toward what they want us to do at all. I am sitting here hearing everyone providing input, and it's exactly what we need to hear so that we can help advise on how to move forward.
Thanks. And I'll just reiterate, this all goes into the assessment in the end. So these are all just inputs. We need to hear from you to be able to get it right. So with that, I think we should move on in the interest of time.
I'm hearing the word, I guess what's coming to my mind is the perception. I think Michaela's doing a really good job, and thank you for all the work that went into setting this up, of getting us to focus on who we think we are, and what other people think we are. Because I think the barrier is the perception as to who the city thinks we are and who and who do we think we are as a committee? And I know that other advisory committees have taken a lot of time to kind of grow into who they are. I know that BDAB took 3 years to kind of become who they are. I think we're going through a growing curve. So it's about, in my mind, it's the perception of who we think we are and what we think other people think we are. And then I think that the brochure that went out was really helpful to a lot of the neighbors, but I'm still hearing from staff that a lot of people don't know even what neighborhood association they're in. So there's a lot of confusion and barriers to what that means to people that are outside of the NAs or aren't part of the NA.
Sure.
I don't want to throw any water on what you're saying, Cassie, but the companies that have representatives on BDAB are being paid to be on BDAB.
True,
I
but
guess-
there's a growing curve to being an advisory committee that, works into a position of, understanding. So yeah, I agree.
Cassie, thank you for adding that. And that's where I see it too, except that I also see a bigger picture where we as NLA and all of our neighbors are saying, hey, we're not feeling heard. And council is saying, hey, this feedback thing is not working. We want to hear from a representative population. So when I step back and think about what we're really doing here and what council is doing, as a taxpayer, I'm thinking with my taxpayer hat, right? I'm thinking, okay, this whole feedback loop relationship between the community and the council, it's currently not working. And if I were on council, I would completely support that goal that council defined. And that's exactly what we're doing here, is adding to that process. I believe in that goal for the city of building that conduit and having the equitable representation within that conduit. And that's where the assessment is coming in. And this is our part of the assessment. And I'm excited about it. I'm excited that we're all coming together and digging into this, because this is the work that'll get us there.
Thank you, Summer. I think so. For the interest of time, what I'm going to do is change this so that we're focusing on board members only through the next 3 sections. And that's what we need help with right now, right? So let's just continue on. I see Karen and then Chris, and then we're going to go on to the successes.
So I'll just speak for myself. The way that we have our board meetings is very structured and follows Robert's Rules of Order. I'm not sure it's very conducive to diverse populations to participate. So the way that neighborhood associations run their meetings and kind of are structured, I think also needs to be looked at. I concur with Elizabeth that parents and families are too busy. And so how do we engage people in a different way than we have before? And I'd be interested in learning more about that.
Thank you. And Chris.
Yeah, I see 2 barriers. One is related to what Lisa and Jim spoke about and what we've been speaking about, that folks feel unheard. I think there's probably a perception of futility to involvement. And I think the way that that's resolved is for the city to show more intensity about its belief that the NA and the NLAs are important. I think that's the only way to persuade people who are disinclined to be involved because they don't perceive any meaning to it. If the city will speak up more frequently and more aggressively and more publicly about the importance of NAs and NLAs and the board service, that may override that perception of futility. The other thing is, I think there's a central problem with the fact that the city has made equity the theme of the work that they're doing in the new biennium. I think that Bend is not a diverse city. And for us to expect each of the NAs to bring in folks to meet this equity goal is virtually impossible. It certainly is on Aubrey Butte. So I think that that's a significant barrier as well. Thank you.
Great. And Jim, did you have a a question, Jim?
Just a couple of comments. Number one, we run our board meetings in very unstructured, so we're probably the opposite. And we still can't get people because some people want more structure. So you can go both ways.
You can't win, can you?
Can't win. The thing I think a barrier that we're seeing, and I just want to add this to it, is we need to sell benefits to the neighborhood associations. Again, putting on my marketing wife's hat. And it's very difficult to sell benefits when you can't get the city to respond to you. So I tried to put together a marketing thing. I'll end up with the negatives. It was terrible. But I think, you know, we're not feeling heard, but it even goes beyond that. When we submit an input to the city, like our land use chair, we get no response at all. Even though there's a lot of valid points in there, and the city just basically ignores it. Just like the city ignored us on, you know, the Murphy Road closure. So the response system, I think, is a real barrier that we see. Thanks.
And Lisa.
Sorry, Lisa, before you go, Jim, can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
I just want to make sure I understand where you're coming from. So what you're saying is if you're thinking about marketing to get board members, it's what do we have to offer? Why would you want to be a board member of an NA? And it's coming up with those reasons or having trouble coming up with those reasons? Am I understanding that correctly?
No, the benefit I'm talking about is what value the NAs can bring to the neighborhoods.
Okay.
In other words, I use the example of the Murphy Road closure. You know, had the city been, I guess, more forthcoming, for lack of a better term, and shared us with their schedule, we could have gone over it and, you know, maybe made some modifications which could have mitigated the long duration of the closure. But the city didn't give us that opportunity to do that. And that was really a missed opportunity. That could have been a great selling point. I mean, if we could say to the Southeast Bend, hey, we worked with the city, we took their plan, which was going to be closed for a year, and we whittled it down to 7 months. And 3 of those months, there was a one-way street. This is to your benefit. That's the kind of benefits that I'm talking about trying to sell. In other words, make people excited. Hey, these guys are really good. They helped us out. Maybe they're valuable. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on to successes. So let's start here. So we're still looking at board members. What has worked for neighborhood associations? I know Karen had asked an opportunity to share best practices that they have had. I know Dave said your board is doing great. Like, these are things that we would love to hear about. So what have you been doing that's working for you?
I can add in. I think whenever we had a summer meeting and we had an annual meeting, and we've always recruited well from those meetings. And that's where we've had a lot of good volunteers. I think that doing email communications or alerts has been very helpful. Facebook has been very helpful for us. And we did a short newsletter, but we think that would even be something I would recommend to everybody, is because it's kind of like people are getting technology's made it easier for people to find out about us. And if you can get into that circuit, into that group of people that are interested, we've actually had several new volunteers, and there's been a wave, and I guess we just got lucky with where we reached them and where we got. It was through email. It was, and I think that, and our annual meetings. So I think that's been helpful, but it really helped that the city provided the budgets for us to get mailers out too. That was a big part of it.
Old Farm sent out a recruitment mailer in April, and today's count is 920. Before we sent out the mailer, we were 781. So just sending out an opportunity exists, and you can play, gained us 22% new subscribers.
That's great.
We also, the NA, Old Farm, met with Joette. Joette had scheduled a meeting with Mary Murphy from the Latinx community. And we had about a 2-hour discussion with Mary yesterday. They are so open to getting input and cooperation from us, you would not believe it. The things that came up were like the mailer that we sent out I said April, but I think it's a little later than that. Have that translated into Spanish, and and the community association said that they would take the Spanish language invitations and put them on a table where they put things like advantages and social meetings and things like that. And we've jumped at that, and we are now planning to put together our financial goals. And one of those is to get 100 of these that are English language on one side and translation to Spanish on the other side. And we're willing to pay for that because we understand how important it is that every word that we say is not a fire word. And we've been told, and I've known forever since I was raised in El Paso, that all you have to do is to say the wrong word or pronounce it the wrong way, and you can lose interest immediately. Mm-hmm. So we are in the process of looking for someone that we can pay to go through not just a Spanish translation, but a Spanish translation process to make sure that everything that we're saying is what we mean. So those are things that we're doing to reach out. We're doing other things, but those are the two that are on the front line right now.
That's great, Dave. Thank you for sharing. I have Chris next. Chris, you're muted.
Now you can hear me. We're Old Bend. We do have a pretty talented board, and I mean, I've seen some real success, as you've heard me complain about lack of completion of the Deschutes River Trail. And 2 of our board members have met with the traffic, Bend traffic leader and the Parks Board. And they walked down Riverfront, the part of the Deschutes River Trail that's totally incomplete, inadequate. And we think something's going to happen. We like the street safety program. We do think safety at Amity School is much improved. And in particular, we've been able to work with Southern Crossing, primarily summer. Karen is doing this, but it has to do with core pine and development along Arizona Avenue. We see it as a threat to much increased cut through traffic through the Old Bend neighborhoods. And we think it's going to happen because housing needs to happen, but we'd like to see a city plan for the development that's going to happen south of Arizona, and Karen and Southern Crossing does too. So we're working together, and we're meeting with the developer of the apartments that will be just on the south side of Arizona Avenue and along the string near Market Choice.
And that's helped you
gain
board members?
Well, no, not recruit more members, but feel like we're listened to, which ultimately, meaning the developers are talking to us. So, I mean, it addresses the issue. Does anybody care what we do? And yes, they do.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Lisa?
So I don't feel like I have an issue with turnover. My newest board member has been with us for 3 years. And so I have basically a board of 5 that have been with me longer than 3 years. And in most cases, I will say I've at least got 2 people that have been with me for longer than 8 years.
Okay.
So in terms of turnover, that's not necessarily the issue. What becomes the issue is people willing to take on the work. And so, for example, the work of a land use chair, it is basically a part-time job because of the way that it's structured and because of the duties in all of the development and posting the meetings and being there for the meetings. That's a really big time commitment. Managing the website, that's also a really big time commitment. So it's getting people that can step up to the plate to do that kind of work. You know, that was one of the reasons that we were investigating, should we do a better job as the NAs to maybe not have so many different websites. Maybe there's something that we could be doing to be more efficient with managing our websites, because we're all doing these individual postings and we're all creating, you know, I'm sure that each one of us, all 13 of us, are basically creating some kind of news blurb to go out about this feedback thing on houselessness. So rather than having one blurb that was created by one person, whether it's at the city or whatever, to save us that time, you know, that's what we're struggling with, is getting that information a little bit more consistent and timely, getting it out. And then, gosh, I had another thought around something that Jim was saying. You're going to have to come back to me. Sorry. Oh, no, what is working? This was the point. What is working is controversy. I hate to say it, but controversy in development, whether it was the River's Edge process and what's going on there, controversy around the COID. I'm getting a lot of engagement around controversy, and a significant amount of engagement around people feeling like the council doesn't listen to them and is focusing on a significant minority population. As much as we need to do something about houselessness, people are feeling like the council doesn't listen.
Okay, Kathy.
Yeah, I think that we've had successes recently with, well, we had a big changeover in our board members. And now I've been getting all of the announcements for the land use stuff and getting it onto Facebook and getting it onto Nextdoor. Man, is that a lot of work. But we're hearing our neighborhood has a lot more involvement now in that land use process. However, everything we submit goes into a developer's notebook and says, yeah, look, we can check off this task. And we don't seem to have any effect on what actually happens in the end. I have no feedback from any of the planners that say, we heard you and we changed something. Most of our input back to the city is also, well, that's not what's in code. Short-term rentals, I asked Michaela to set up something on short-term rentals so that maybe we can figure out what we could say. And on several other issues, sort of like the Murphy Road one that was brought up, we have Britta Street, where the neighbors are furious about Britta Street. And when I talked to, why are we putting bike lanes on a dead-end street, I kind of got laughed at by the city person I was talking to.
Hey, Kathy, this is Summer. So we're focusing on sharing what has worked.
So I was saying, this is the things that's worked, but this is the limit as to how much it's worth. So that's what I was trying to fit it into that box. So getting better land use stuff out, but if it was in a more social media friendly format, that would make my job a lot less. When we provide, so we're getting a lot of people more active in the land use process, but the input we provide is going nowhere.
Got it. Thanks, Kathy.
Okay.
Elizabeth.
I would just have to second what Lisa said, the controversy in our neighborhood coming down the pipeline with the COID property and the potential loss of that amazing natural resource. People are really fired up. And we have 2 new board members because of the concern of that issue. So the controversy and concern about losing a resource in a neighborhood is tremendous, tremendous for recruiting new board members.
Great, thank you.
And Karen.
I just wanted to learn from the other NAs and which ones have full boards and what is the composition of those boards so that I can learn from the ones that have been successful and what practices. I appreciate the input people have given, but a lot of it is more toward recruitment of members in general, not just board members. So I guess I'm really interested in getting into the weeds about which boards have been successful and then what can I mimic or replicate in my own NA.
Yeah, I love that. That's exactly where we're headed. We're doing the legwork behind that. And then as soon as we flip the switch, we're going to be talking about, okay, we've gone through this process. We've brainstormed together. We've talked about barriers. We have some ideas from folks that are being more successful. How do we bring that together and then share it with our NAs to really build things up? So thank you for that.
Steve.
The OFDNA has 7 members on its bylaws. We have 7 members. We've got a chair, a vice chair, a land use. We've got a secretary. We've got a treasurer. We've got an IT person. We've got a person that's just a regular member. And we've got a lady that's standing on the side asking us to change our bylaws so that we can have her come in as a full-time secretary kind of person. So yeah, all you have to do is when you recruit, you have to tell people how long is it going to take and what is the job description.
So defining expectations.
Yeah. So if you don't do that, people have no idea what they're stepping up to.
Right. And then they won't do it.
Yeah, I think that's great. And something that Karen actually had asked in her email before the meeting today was, how do we get folks in to volunteer when maybe the idea of being a formal board member is too daunting? And I know that there's several of you who have, I don't know if you'd call them ex officio or what you want to say, but they are people who run your social media, update your webpage, but maybe aren't held to like coming to every board meeting. Maybe you reach out to those folks. And I think my example here was this specifically creating positions on your board that are task specific. So i.e. we need someone to run our social media. And that gets very specifically down to defining expectations. When you say join our board, that's so broad that people don't know what they're signing up for, right? Great.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, let's move to opportunities. So we have about 13 minutes left. And these are the questions. And, you know, I'm going to send this to you so you can look at it. If you continue to think of things afterwards, like, please do send them to me. What are some ways that you want the city or the NLA to support neighborhood associations? What are ways you want the NAs to collaborate? What have you seen work elsewhere in other cities? Some examples that I have here are city funding goes to participatory funding instead of board operations. That's something I saw at the Neighborhoods USA conference last year, is instead of funding like communications and board operations like the city of Bend does, some cities fund programs closer to the likes of the Neighborhood Street Safety Program which allows people to focus on beautification of their neighborhoods or a project to come together that everybody cares about. An example of what the city could do, city could host regular trainings for NA boards. Is that helpful? Do you want specific trainings? Do you want general trainings? Like those are the kind of things that maybe we could help with. An example for the NLA, can we buckle down and launch Hootsuite? Can we get it out there? Is that something that we want to do? So I did grab Dave's concern just from the opportunity from the last section, which was working with the Latino Community Association on outreach to Latinx communities. And I would love to hear what other opportunities you see.
So this is Summer. I'll kick us off with a couple ideas from Morgan for Larkspur. She had several ideas, a couple that are standing out for me. One is partnering with local businesses to host an event. That'll really help get the word out, maybe a fundraiser, that kind of thing. Also, trying to use high school students or maybe college students as a resource. And not only a resource, but I mean, they're potential neighbors and members, right? So that's another population from which we can try to understand better.
I would highly recommend that more NAs do not make contact with the Latinx group, because I can't think of anything worse than having 13 different neighborhoods take up an hour of my time as the director of that group.
Nope, sorry, Dave. We're all gonna steal them from you.
Well, that's fine, but pick another demographic.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
Lots of demographics.
Right.
I'm just teasing you. Yep, I hear you.
And Dave, when I say like when it has working with LCA on outreach, I think that that's something the NLA could do in partnership with this new community relations manager who's already working with the LCA, so that there is one point of contact. You know, those are the kind of partnerships, and that's what will come out of this once I take it and distill it all down.
Okay, well, I haven't heard either from the Latinx lady that we talked to, or in any communication that I've seen with the board, the council, the NLA. I haven't seen anything about reaching out to the Latinx group community.
That is because we have not done it yet, but we're thinking about it.
Well, I'm recommending that if the city wants to piggyback on what the NLA is doing, God bless you, but don't do it in a way that distracts them from the kinds of things that they're willing to do with Old Farm.
Got it. Kathy.
Am I off mute? Can you hear me?
You're good.
Okay. I had a thought a while back. Yeah, like this is really a long while back, but it might fit in here. And that is COCC has a whole set of courses on small businesses, but it doesn't have anything on nonprofits. And I wondered if they would want to have something or work with the city on having courses for nonprofits to deal with some of these tools and approaches, and maybe mix us in with some other people that do business like we do, and therefore would get us out of our neighborhoods, but get us exposed to other cultural identities in the city.
Great, thank you. Steve, and then Lisa, and then we will wrap up.
Did you say, Steve? I'll go ahead and jump in here. I just want to second the high school and college kids, as an ex-superintendent, I know that's very valuable, and there's lots of opportunity in there. They're willing and they have lots of energy. Secondly, I love the idea of participatory program budgeting or financing. I mean, the budget should be emphasized in any event as a very strong a asset to the NLA, and I don't know how others use it, but this is one of the ways that we can really get out there, and we certainly appreciate the amount of money that's being spent. So, and COCC also has an adjunct department up there that does small business related stuff, that has a bunch of students there that work for, well, work study kind of associated tasks and so on, but they're very good at engaging with those of us who want to interface in this variety of ways that we're talking about. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you. Lisa.
Just real quick. First, I really think that our meeting needs to be extended so that we can get through our sharing time. I think that that's really important for us all. Second, on the topic of college students, and I wish this had worked. We created a board position for an OSU student because OSU is in our neighborhood. And unfortunately, that fell flat. That person was overly busy, overly committed. So I don't know if it was a personality issue or if it was strictly because students just have a lot on their plate. I would love to see that succeed. It was something that I really thought could take off. But in terms of what I've seen work elsewhere, I really feel like we need to do a little bit more to become more streamlined. I love the idea of Hootsuite, and I apologize that it's not been able to get off the ground. I need some help with it, and that would be terrific. But I'm also to the point where I don't think I'm the right person to manage it because I've got other commitments. So just finding ways to be more efficient, I think, is really, really critical for all of the neighborhoods.
And Jim.
Okay, just kind of one final point. I think the one thing that the city could do that would have a great benefit is to kind of change the culture so that interaction with the NAs is prized instead of avoided. And I think that would help a great deal. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. Chris Pearson.
Yeah, I think to sort of supplement what Jim just said is I think it might be helpful and an opportunity if the city could find ways to either implicitly or directly publicize contributions that the NA or NLA has made and what sorts of changes the city has made because of things that have been proposed by NAs or NLAs, so that, whether it's on Nextdoor or wherever it's publicized, Facebook, getting that message out that it's actually made a difference might make an impact on getting people involved.
Love that. Thank you. So I want to be sensitive to people's time and respectful of your time. We are just about at 6 o'clock. I know there are a few more people that might want to share where they're at. And Michaela, I don't know if you have more information you're wanting to cover, but I'm open to extending this meeting for another 15-20 minutes if the group wants to do that.
Can I get some clarity? You want to wrap up the brainstorm and go to rep reports?
Not necessarily. We can do that, and I do feel that's important. I also feel like this is very important because it's the foundation of what we're building. Yeah. So I would like to try to wrap this up, and then I think for rep reports, I think what I'd like to do is, Michaela, is there a way to do that? I want to say offline, like through email. Is there a different way to share without breaking public record law?
The best way is that we have a rep report form, and it would be each of you filling that out and sending it to me. And then I would send it to everyone, but I don't think that's the best way. I also think that, I'd like this to sit with you guys and give you some more time to think about opportunities and successes. I know I got a lot via email that I can add to this. Great. So I think what I'd like to do is take this information that we got and put it into a document that I can share and that we can all add to. And
that's fantastic. Good. I love it. Let's do some rep reports. Okay, let's go backwards. Morgan's not here. Kathy.
We had a September meeting. Michaela did her, what is it, NLA, and how does it work? And I have that recording, but I don't know how to send it or post it anywhere yet. Sorry, I'm so slow. We have an October meeting coming up with Stacy Witt of Reach, and that's going to be on October 20th. I'll send out information, and anybody who wants to is welcome to join us. And now I have a November meeting set up because the library wanted to meet with the neighborhood association to tell the architects for the new library wanted to meet with the neighborhood association. And today at their meeting, they were asking about cultural art and cultural items that should be included in the architecture, and also interaction with people without homes and or houses. And I think that with those two issues will keep us involved with them for quite some time. Chris Rankin is our actual rep on that committee. And unless there's questions, I'm signing off here. All right, that's the end of my report.
Thank you. Let's go to Elizabeth.
We, Southwest Bend had a board meeting yesterday. This is the second or so board meeting since Liz Welton, our previous chair, had to step down. So I am sort of learning the ropes of getting all the accounts switched over, and that's a little bit of a process. We have determined that our general meeting will be November 18th. It will be via Zoom, of course. And we're working on getting our mailer ready in the next couple of days to send out to our Southwest Bend neighbors. That's it.
Thank you. Steve.
Yeah, thanks. We held a board meeting, actually it was the last NLA meeting, and we had a board meeting at the same time. And we went through a reconfiguration. We got a new board chair, a vice chair, and we have 2 new members. We have spent the last month defining and reconfiguring roles. Our previous chair left us in very good standing, and we are now working diligently on some recruitment efforts in any event that we had already established as a priority for us, both to get diversity as well as just to get a broader membership. And we want to again say thank you to the city for their budgeting process, which grants us enough to really get some things done, and we're going to reconfigure that as well. But that seems to be, we have a meeting now, an adjunct committee working on how to engage a greater number of community entities, as it were, both individuals as well as companies and community, assets, whether that's Costco up here in our neighborhood or some of the pubs and whatnot. But in any event, we're on the case. We have a new configuration, and we're looking forward to it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Chris Pearson.
Yeah, thanks. I've enjoyed these meetings. This is great. I value what the city is trying to do here, and I think probably we'll get a good result in the end. I think as far as Aubrey Butte, we've not had a general meeting since the last NLA meeting. We did have a working group meeting at the end of last month that addressed our general meeting, which is coming up on November 4th. We've had a huge growth in membership. So one, I think, unusual step that we're taking is in the general meeting, we're planning on having the back half of the meeting devoted to hearing from our members. The River's Edge development has been hugely important to the growth of our membership, and we want to hear what people have to say. So we're going to sort of follow the track that we do with these city meetings and give folks 2 minutes to stand up and or on Zoom and say what they think is important about what's going on in Aubrey Butte. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Lisa?
So we have not had a board meeting that's coming up next week, so we'll be catching up, but we have had a couple of public meetings. And in terms of our neighborhood, I'm taking a lot of calls from neighbors that are concerned about the neighborhood meetings. The developers are continuing to show up, and when they show up for these public meetings, they are not required to have traffic reports. They're not required to have a lot of the details figured out. And so people end up feeling like they're not getting a lot of information and they're not being heard. And they feel like the developers are deliberately doing this. They're not required to. They're not required to show up to a public meeting with the traffic reports, and that's causing a great deal of frustration. There's also a good deal of frustration around the signage. So even though we made some adjustments to the development signage, I'm still getting a lot of comments around these signs are not large enough and they can't read them. And especially if they are handwritten, sometimes you can't read the handwriting. And you certainly can't read them from the road while you're in the car going past them. And you pretty much have to pull over if you see a sign and get out of your car and go try to read it. So there's a lot of frustration around that. I've got incredible frustration expressed among neighbors that their concerns that are raised at the public meetings are never addressed. You know, they just go into a black hole. And as much as we are trying to help people understand that by the time we have a neighborhood public meeting, it's generally too late to affect any kind of change. We're trying to manage those expectations and we're trying to set the tone for those meetings. There's an incredible amount of frustration that the codes exist the way that they do, and people don't know what to do about that. And then finally, some concerns about the council and the direction around homelessness. There's a lot of frustration that the council is not directing more to be done to prevent some of the tent cities that are popping up on right-of-ways. And we're not doing more to enforce cleaning some of that up. So that's what we have in our neighborhood.
That's a lot. Thank you, Lisa. Sean? Do we still have Sean? How about Cassie?
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, all right. So we actually launched our website at the end of September. We're pretty excited about it. And we had somebody volunteer pro bono to actually help us with that, which is pretty amazing. We've got a new person who's working on Parks and Rec. We brought him in as a committee person and we think he's great. So we're probably going to add him on as a board member shortly. And that's one of the ways we do it. We bring people on as committee members. And he's been really good. And our board meetings are the third Monday of the month. So it's next week. We just had August summer meeting. We had some good and bad reports because the Parks and Rec person had some problems technically. But we did get a lot of new members out of that. So we're looking at February for our annual meeting. And there's a lot, by the way, I posted yesterday on Facebook the city's request for input. So far, we've got 95 responses and one person is interested in what our position statement is going to be. And right now, our board position is to provide feedback to us. We'll provide it to the city. If we think there's a majority of people that feel the same way, then we will try to write something up that will involve the neighborhood as a general, as a total. But we have a lot of different people in our neighborhood that have different perspectives on homelessness and houselessness. So our goal is to be inclusive and be, what we say is educate and inform. And I will finish by saying that one of our board members, the civil engineer, is on the Go Bond committee and is bringing up there's a lot of input now that the city's looking for that. And so we're trying to track that as well as NSSP. And so we want to make sure that the city is following up with what we consider to be our priorities. So those are two areas that we're certainly concerned about. Traffic and pedestrian and bike safety is a huge issue. Galveston is one of the areas that we would like to see more work on. We don't think that the transportation bond looks like 2025 is the first time that will happen. So we're trying to see what we can do about just keeping people in the loop on what the city wants to do with that. There was a recent group that got together and did a bike sort of tour of the downtown area because they're concerned about bike crashes. You might have seen that. So there's a lot of effort that's being put into the community right now on bicycle safety in, you know, in terms of how to work with traffic and how to be more visible. So I think those are our biggest issues. And I think that's really it for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Cassie. Chris Freeze.
You probably had half the report earlier in the meeting from me from Old Bend. To answer Karen's question, we have about 7 in attendance at our board meeting, and probably 2 that are board members that don't show, so we don't really count them. Things are going well, though. Our board is a bunch of old white guys, and it's a little bit co-ed, but they're all well respected and out there in the neighborhood meeting people, and some of them design and work with the city. So we're favored to have relatively good input into the city personnel. We're favored to have a board liaison that attends our meetings. So things are going pretty well. I guess I can't be more specific than that. I very much feel that and agree that our small board is not very representative. Doesn't seem like a very democratic process. But I truly think COVID has made it difficult to get large involvement that I'd like to see. That's about it.
Thanks, Chris. Jim?
Okay, so since the last NLA meeting, we have not had a board meeting, so my report's going to be kind of pretty brief. We do have 4 vacancies on the board. We're also a bunch of old white guys, and we recently lost the co-ed contingent of our board, not through anything we did, but they just felt they weren't contributing. And I don't have anything else to report because for the last 10 days, I've been camping in an internet desert with my prime and backup communication system failing. So I haven't been able to talk to anybody until today. So it's been kind of rough. Maybe it'll be better next month. Thanks.
Welcome back to civilization.
That's right. Karen.
Southern Crossing is still concerned about the outstanding NSP projects. It's really hard to follow the status of them, and reading the minutes from the Transportation Bond Oversight Committee is kind of timely. And that's one more task kind of to add to the to-do list of NLAs or NAs. So any help on the NSP projects would be appreciated. We continue to work with other neighborhood associations. I believe strongly in collaboration. So we're working with Old Bend. We're having our joint board meeting on October 21st. The 2 boards are meeting. A developer is presenting to us on their proposed development. They did reach out to us. They want to do community outreach. So both Old Bend and Southern Crossing are really excited that we're given this opportunity. We're working with Southwest Bend on the COID property. Anyway, hopefully we'll launch a community campaign this week, and NAs will not be as heavily involved as they have been. So that's pretty much it.
Thanks, Karen. Do we still have Dave Johnson with us? Dave, are you here? I think he is not here. Okay, so a quick update for Orchard District. We are still pedal to the metal on recruiting. My only hesitation with our recruiting is wanting to work in some advice from the equity person when they get to the city. So I'm excited for that. Other than that, we've been talking about what our neighbors feel and what we're hearing from our neighbors about the houseless issue. And we'll be putting together some public comment for that. But that's all, that's pretty much all that we're focused on right now. And I think that wraps up our rep reports. I want to thank Mayor Russell for joining us, and Councilor Perkins was here earlier. So thank you for stepping in and hearing this input. It means a lot. And I think we're ready to go. Thank you everyone so much for your participation today. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.